Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's nanoTalks. My name is Ilaria, and I will guide you through our evening. Before we will delve into the topic of tonight's nanoTalks, the topic of ethics, I want to introduce you to what the nanoTalks are and to what you can expect from tonight. Now, the nanoTalks are 2, 10 to 15, 20-minute talks each that aim to give early career scientists the opportunity to present a topic of their choice, mostly a topic of their own research, to present them to a broader audience. Tonight's nanoTalks are hosted and organized by members of REACH's SIMPACT program. Now, SIMPACT is a program where we, young people from all over Switzerland who are either interested in science or work in science themselves, are encouraged to take responsibility and use our knowledge to create future solutions and take action. During the program, we organize events such as this one and also participate in different workshops where we learn all the tools that we need to be drivers for change. So the main goal of SIMPACT is to put science into perspective, and that's also the main goal of REACH. REACH is the independent think tank that is behind SIMPACT and also behind the nanoTalks. REACH is led by young and early career scientists from diverse fields from all over Switzerland, and we work for a science-friendly culture. And what is a science-friendly culture? It is a culture where science and society work side by side to solve all of the current but also the future problems. So if you want to help us with our goal, or if you want to just know more about REACH, you can become a member of our community. You can either be an active member and organize our events and come to our events, or you can just sign up for our newsletter and you will be informed on everything that is going on with REACH. Participation is a big part of the nanoTalks, and interaction is a big part of our talks. However, things are a little bit different now because we are hosting tonight's nanoTalks from our studio and not live with a live audience. However, we still want to take participation and interaction into consideration. And in order to do that, you can go to slide.do and enter the code nano-ethics. There you can type in all of the questions that you have during the talks. Now, after the talks, our speakers will join us for a live Q&A session where they will answer your questions. So don't be shy and ask whatever question comes up to your mind. Now, after my short introduction, I would like to introduce you to the first speaker of our talks. Her name is Ning Wang, and she has recorded her talk but will be live with us during the Q&A session later after the talks. She is a PhD candidate at the Institute of Biomedical Ethics and History of Medicine at the University of Zurich. In her PhD project, she investigates ethical questions in regards to the use of drones for humanitarian purposes. And this will also be the topic of her talk. So enjoy Ning's talk.
Hello everyone, my name is Ning. I'm an ethicist by training with a background in applied ethics and political science. I'm currently completing my PhD in bioethics and law at the University of Zurich. And in my research, I look at how to integrate ethical values in the humanitarian use of drones in a broader context of aid, development, and healthcare. My presentation today is structured in the following way. First, I'll spend 2 minutes or so to briefly introduce my project, followed by the research methodology used in the study. Then, in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll present a case study conducted in Nepal last year where drones were used to map a landslide area after the 2015 earthquake, followed by an analysis about the ethical challenges emerged from this context. After the presentation, I'll be looking forward to a live discussion with you all. So this project was conceived in late 2017 and was officially kicked off a year later. We are now halfway through it. We are funded by two Swiss foundations for 2.5 years. We, as always, thank them for their generous support. As you can see, we have a very small project team, basically two PIs based here in Zurich and in Montreal, Canada, and myself being a researcher. The way we run our project is through collaboration. We have three sets of partners, including three academic institutions from Europe and North America, three organizational partners who support us in our fieldwork, which we'll get into in a second, and an advisory committee with several humanitarian organizations that are interested in potentially deploying drones in their operations. The objective of the research is to help aid organizations implement the value-sensitive innovation approach through two means. First, a conceptual governance framework, and second, a set of practical toolkits. The way we develop these tools is through empirical case studies. Specifically, I collect qualitative data through semi-structured interviews in the field, and then we draw normative analysis from the data. Based on the existing practices in the field, we designed 3 case studies. Each one focuses on a specific use case of drones, such as mapping, cargo delivery, or with multiple purposes. As you can see from this slide, these case studies also reflect a diversity of geographic, cultural, and socioeconomic conditions in which drones are being deployed. So this is a brief background about where this project comes from. Now, I bet you're secretly wondering at this point, what is the problem? And let me assure you that you're not alone. Typically, when I tell people that I study the ethics of the good drones, they scratch their heads. So let me quickly walk you through the phenomenon of the humanitarian drone rise, starting from humanitarian technology. Actually, humanitarian technology is not new to us. As you may recall, in the last decades also, solar panels were broadly introduced in Africa and Latin America to address the energy access issue. In the public health domain, mobile phones were rapidly deployed to implement e-health and m-health programs across the developing world. In recent years, biometric information like fingerprints and iris scans started to be collected in refugee camps when food and other aid supplies were provided to them. And as the focus of my own research, drones are being increasingly adopted by international organizations with various applications, such as search and rescue mapping, medical cargo delivery, post-disaster radio tower, distribution of genetically modified mosquitoes to fight malaria, Zika, and other vector-borne infectious diseases. And even in the COVID pandemic, as you probably have noticed, drones again made headlines. Echoing the emergence of humanitarian technology, humanitarian innovation also became a popular rhetoric, appeared in many stakeholders' agendas. For instance, we had the so-called digital humanitarian movement, where every citizen was encouraged to participate in crisis mapping. We had earmarked funds dedicated to humanitarian innovation and international conferences in the name of humanitarian technology. We started to see more and more mainstreamed media platforms featuring life-saving drones, and self-made public speakers started to share success stories around the world. Scholars as well quickly joined the debate, writing articles and books on the good drone, and grassroots organizations volunteered to develop a code of conduct on ethically operating the good drones. Last but not least, you have researchers like myself spending 3 years good time tossing around the notion of value-sensitive innovation and what it means to the global humanitarian sector. So, what is really going on behind all this? Driven by curiosity, I set out on my journey in January 2019, and the first stop was Nepal. As you probably recall, in April 2015, Nepal was hit by a disastrous earthquake with a magnitude of 7.8 and several continued aftershocks. This is a visualization of the immediate damages caused by the earthquake. If numbers don't say much to you, here I've got some photos to bring us back in time. Thousands of houses were destroyed across the country, with entire villages flattened. People lost their lives, or the lives of their loved ones, and the whole country was in deep sorrow. So the Nepalese government was completely overloaded and pleaded the world for help. In response, within 48 hours, international organizations arrived in Kathmandu, including our project partner, which I'll call AM in this presentation. So the mandate of AM was to launch reconstruction missions because roads were destroyed or blocked and infrastructure was inaccessible. In one of the districts where AM was operating, there was a landslide with some 10 to 20 households scattered around the area. Now, the landslide has been there for decades and started eroding in recent years due to climate change. Worse yet, the earthquake accelerated its deterioration process. So to make sure that it would be safe to build new houses in this area, AM needed to assess the risks to human settlements in the long run. So prior to Nepal, AM had disaster relief missions in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan, and there they used drones to assist relief work, and the results were positive. So one of the emergency response officers brought a drone with him to Nepal with the intention to use it again to assist their work, though exactly how they were not entirely sure at first. Then it turned out that to make accurate risk assessment of the landslide, AM would need innovative tools to monitor its complicated geological conditions. Notice here that landslides are not uncommon in Nepal and that there are existing techniques to monitor them, such as satellite images or ground measurements. However, both techniques have major limitations. And in comparison, drones are more cost efficient, producing richer data more quickly and with less safety risks. So it just occurred naturally to AM that, we've got a drone here. Why not using it to collect high resolution images and create a map of the landslide? So shortly after, AM put together a project team and applied for external funds to support the project, actually from some Swiss foundations. Because they didn't have the technical know-how in-house, they teamed up with two partners, an NGO to help create the map and a university spin-off to help carry out the hazard assessment. In parallel, they started immediately to apply for flight permissions. Now, after the earthquake, Nepal implemented very strict regulations for civilian use of drones. As a result, AM needed to apply for a total of 6 permissions, including 4 at the national level and 2 at the district level, such as the Civil Aviation Authority as shown here, and several other ministries located inside this compound. Finally, it took AM 3 months to clear all the regulatory requirements, and they got the green light to fly. Here are some photos I took during my field work. I spent 2 days visiting the community living by the landslide. I remember it was mountains after mountains. At some point, it wasn't even road anymore. And it took us a whole day driving from Kathmandu only to reach the town center of the area. And only the next noon we arrived at the landslide. It was indeed huge. So standing on the top of the landslide, my head was dizzy and my legs shaky. I reminded myself that back after the earthquake, this was the environment in which the drone project was conducted. As for the community, the villagers live a very simple life. They didn't seem to do much other than just hanging around chatting to each other. You may have noticed here that the villagers are mostly women, children, and the elderly. This is because all the young men were working in the cities to basically bring food back and feed their families. So when AM first arrived in the village, they did the so-called community sensitization, which is a standard process for aid organizations operating in local communities. For example, they held information sessions to help the villagers to understand what a drone is and how and why they wanted to use the drone. They also asked for consent from the community leaders, although verbally, and got it. So long story short, AM launched several drone flights over the landslide, collected images they needed, created a 3D map, and carried out hazard analysis. In terms of data management, the core data would start with M because they were the official owner of the datasets. But in practice, the two project partners and the local government also had access to the data. The main conclusion of the technical report suggested that to effectively manage the landslide, more research must be done, meaning that more data was needed and therefore more funds. However, M never really had earmarked funds for the drone project in the first place, and so as they ran out of money about a year later, they had to close the project. And for the villagers, they didn't seem to have been bothered. I guess for them, life moves on and they keep living on hope, as they told me so many times during my interviews. So, this is the Nepal story, and like a few other post disaster relief cases, Nepal has been depicted as a success story by many aid organizations and popular media. Looking from the ethical perspective, although the project created value in terms of awareness raising, seeking community consent, and fulfilling regulatory obligations and so on, at the end of the day, it's hard to escape the fact that the community didn't actually gain much from the drone mapping. And so, based on our study, we concluded that these five aspects listed here should be addressed with more nuanced analysis, namely community, technology, data, regulation, and stakeholders. I probably don't have much time left now, so I'll just walk you through them to spark some discussions for later. First off, community. Here, two key factors are at play: consent and duty of care. So, since quite earlier on in my interviews, I kept hearing narratives like trust and hope from the villagers. This made me think, was the trust pre given because AM was providing aid supplies to them, or was it newly established? Was there hope and over optimistic belief towards humanitarian action in general, or might there be a so called philanthropic misconception? Also, did the community members' literacy level allow them to really understand the potential risks of drones and the value of their consent? Do the humanitarian organizations have a special duty of care towards disaster affected populations? Because these people already are vulnerable in the first place and cannot afford to be made vulnerable on top of it. In terms of technology, as shown in this case study, drones clearly hold tremendous promises in assisting humanitarian action, especially in resource poor countries like Nepal. However, any technology has limitations, both technical ones and societal ones. Although drone technology is evolving at an impressively rapid pace, there are still inherent technical tensions, compromises, and trade offs. And so, for what purposes will drones be deployed? In what contexts? And under what conditions should their use be justified? These questions must be asked before drones are introduced in the humanitarian sector and on the basis of comprehensive risk benefits analysis. I think with this audience, we would agree that technology is neither value neutral nor apolitical, and it cannot offer a so called magic solution to tackle systemic and long standing structural problems. With respect to data, privacy, safety, and security are obviously the core issues, which are closely related to data collection, storage, and usage. More specifically, why are certain images captured? Who is capturing them? Where are the data being stored? And is there any existing data management procedure in place? Also, who owns the data? Who has access to the data? And who has authority to share the data? Although data protection has increasingly becoming a priority for regulators, especially in the European context, we all know that there is still a long way to go. Regarding regulation, the biggest challenge here is the gap between a fast and robust technology development and a painfully slow regulation progress. This leads to a dilemma. That is, on the one hand, we don't want the tech industry to be underregulated, therefore imposing risks to the public. But on the other hand, we don't want either to have an overregulated ambiance, which eventually will stifle technology progress. So ultimately, the question boils down to how to strike a balance. In the drone context, who should be the lead regulators at the national and global levels? How should the compliance and enforcement mechanisms be established? and what legal and administrative procedures should be set up? These questions are extremely challenging because regulation is political. It is top down and so a hot potato. Last but not least, stakeholders. The key words here are responsibility and accountability, with a bottom-up force. More specifically, why introducing new technology in the first place? And how should it be introduced to vulnerable populations, like those appeared in this case study? For government, how should they set their political agendas vis-a-vis, for example, the tech industry's lobbying? For humanitarian organizations, how should they position themselves in the digital age? As an aid agency or an uncritical innovation pioneer? For community, what exactly are the essential needs, and how can these needs be articulated, understood, and appropriately addressed such that humanitarian projects carried out over their lands are not humanitarian experimentations, but rather beneficial to them? These are all fundamental questions to be asked, and I hope now to discuss some of them with you during the Q&A session. So thank you for your time and attention. I hope I haven't bored.
Thank you very much, Ning, for your presentation. Just a quick reminder, you can ask questions by visiting slide.do and entering the code nano-ethics. We will discuss these questions together with the speakers after their second talk during our live Q&A session. So I encourage you to ask whatever comes to your mind. Now, the next speaker has also recorded her talk for us, but she will also join us afterwards for a live discussion. Her name is Valentina Christen-Zihlmann. She's an attorney at law and also a PhD candidate at the University of Basel. Her research deals with the question of restrictions in reproductive medicine in Switzerland, mainly the prohibition of embryo donations, and also if such restrictions do really make sense and if they are justified. We will hear more about it during her talk, so enjoy Valentina's talk.
Hi everyone, welcome to my nanotalk on restrictions on reproductive medicine in Switzerland. First, I would like to start with the question, why are assisted reproductive technologies relevant? So in our Western societies, around every sixth couple suffers from infertility. That's around 15% of the population. And these numbers are increasing. Infertility means that a heterosexual couple, has had unprotected intercourse for a year, but the woman did not fall pregnant successfully. So the reasons for the increasing infertility are not 100% known, but we do have some suspects, which will first of all be the increased age in women when wanting to get pregnant, when wanting to have a family. So we know that after the age of 25, a woman's egg qualities start to slightly decline. They go down even more at the age of 33, and after the age of 35, we know that the egg quality in women decreases rapidly, which makes it harder for a woman to fall pregnant naturally. We also have obesity and smoking and substance abuse for causes for infertility, and especially when it comes to the use of steroids, this is a main factor for male infertility. We also suspect that environmental factors such as pesticides or plasticizers may cause infertility, especially male infertility. So assisted reproductive technologies, or shortly ART, can help overcome infertility, so they can help a couple having children of their own. So we split the assisted reproductive technologies, or ART, into two groups, homologous ART and heterologous ART. Homologous ART is that a couple uses their own sperm and egg, and this is usually done with in vitro fertilization. Here I show you how in vitro fertilization works. So at number one, we collect the sperm from the testicles. So either they get extracted surgically or the man basically ejaculates into a cup. And then at number two, we extract the eggs from the ovaries. This is done surgically. Then we put the eggs and the sperm together in vitro, so in a glass, which you can see at number three. And then either we wait for the sperm to attack and fertilize the egg, or we can do intracytoplasmatic sperm injection, where the doctor chooses a sperm that looks very viable, picks it up with a needle, and then injects the needle straight into the egg. And then at stage 4, we wait for the fertilized egg to develop into a blastocyst, which is an embryo. Usually we wait until day 5 or 6, and then we look at the embryo, whether it develops healthily, and if so, we go to stage number 5 and transfer this embryo into the uterus and hope for a successful pregnancy. If we have more than one embryo at stage 4 that looks healthy, we can cryopreserve the embryos that we do not want to transfer into the uterus. And that means we can freeze and store them for a later use, so for a second pregnancy. Heterologous methods are, medically speaking, the same methods, but we involve a third party. So we can do sperm donation, where we use the sperm of another man, egg donation, where we use the eggs of another woman, embryo donation, where a couple gives their cryopreserved embryos to another couple, or surrogacy, where at number 5, we do not transfer the embryo into the uterus of the woman who wants to be a mother, but into another woman who will carry the baby and give birth to it and then hand it back over to the couple. What we also have, but that's still in an experimental phase, is mitochondrial donation, where the egg is actually made up of 2 different eggs, and uterus transplant, which is an organ transplantation. We can also do pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which means that before we transfer the embryo, when we look at it, we can look at it even more detailed. We can search for genetic mutations that run in our family. We can even go more into detail with pre-implantation genetic screening that can look at risk factors that are non-hereditary, so that we can look that there are no, for example, chromosomal abnormalities such as Down syndrome. So that means that technically a child can have up to 5 parents. So at number 1, we have the social and legal mother. Number 2, the social and legal father, or you can name them parent 1 and parent 2 if you would like to be more gender neutral. Then we add another man, the sperm donor. He is the biological and genetic father because he gives his sperm. And then at number 4, we have the egg donor. She is the genetic mother because she gives her egg. Then we transfer the embryo into another woman, the surrogate. She is the biological mother because she gives birth to the baby and she carries the baby. We can also select the gender of the embryo, so we can decide whether we would like to have a boy or a girl. We can do the genetic screening, like mentioned on the slide before, but we can also go the other way. So instead of looking for a baby that is as healthy as possible, if we have parents that have say, like let's say they are blind or deaf or they have dwarfism, they can also choose an embryo that has the same disability. So that is, for example, also blind. So looking at this, we have to ask ourselves the question, where do we draw the line? And how do we draw the line to the medical possibilities? We do that by creating a law. So the legal status in Switzerland is as follows. We allow homologous art, that means art where you use your own sperm and egg for heterosexual couples, of course. They must be infertile, so they must have tried to fall pregnant naturally. There's also an unofficial age restriction for women. So at around the age of 43, if you pass that, then art clinics will not treat you anymore in Switzerland. When it comes to heterologous methods, we only allow sperm donation, and only for married heterosexual couples. So lesbian couples, unmarried couples, and single women are excluded as of right now. Also, we do not allow for anonymous donations. So the child, when it turns 18, it can contact the art clinic and get information and contact details of the sperm donor. Also, the couple cannot select a donor by themselves. So there's no such thing as a Tinder for sperm or a catalog where you can just scroll through and choose the donor you'd like. It is actually the art clinic that chooses the donor. We allow for pre-implantation genetic diagnosis if one parent may carry a grave genetic disease. So we can detect this disease if medically possible and then make sure the embryo does not carry this specific disease. But we are not allowed to look any further. So when we look at that, compare it to what is possible, we see that we have a restrictive approach in Switzerland. So why do we have this restrictive approach? We have a fear of designer babies, so we do not want that parents create their baby like a product and make sure that it has these or those qualities, that it's intelligent or very athletic or has a musical talent, or that it has blue eyes, blonde hair, and is a male or a female. So we do not want to go down that road. Also, we fear that if we start to eliminate all disabilities possible, then what happens if someone is born with a disability? Will that person be discriminated on? Also, we put the best interest of the child as the major factor. So it's not the interest of the parents. So there is no right to a child, and even less so a right to a specific child for the parents. The focus is on the best interest of the child. And that means in Switzerland that we only allow for family structures that are naturally possible. That means that, for example, egg donation is not allowed in Switzerland because there's a split between the genetic mother and the biological mother, and that does not occur naturally. We also say that it might cause harm, psychological harm to the child if it knows that it comes from two different mothers. Interestingly, though, we allow for sperm donation because we say that it happens in nature. It happens also with natural conception, that the social father is not the biological father of the child, whether he knows it or not. To sum up, in Switzerland, we say that not everything that's technically possible should be legal. So what do couples do if they want to have a baby and they can only use an art that is illegal in Switzerland? They go on reproductive tourism. That's a subcategory of medical tourism where people travel abroad to have medical procedures done either because they are cheaper abroad or because they are illegal in their home country. The internet helps us find liberal countries and clinics that offer the art that we wish, and fast and cheap travel help us achieve or go to these clinics very easily. Swiss people usually travel to Spain, the Czech Republic, or Cyprus, and this is mostly done for egg donation. So what happens if a couple travels abroad, gets egg donation done, the woman falls pregnant, they come back, she gives birth to a baby, and they tell everyone that the baby is born with egg donation? Well, actually, nothing happens at all. There is no prosecution done, there is no fine, there won't be any investigation, the child won't be taken away or anything like that. There's one exception. So if you have a surrogacy, and if that gets known, then it's the surrogate mother who gets registered as the legal mother in the birth certificate. And she then has to give up the baby for adoption, and then the social mother has to adopt the baby. So I was curious. I wanted to know, okay, what can I get done in Europe if I wanted to? So I Googled a bit, and the first result that came up when I was Googling IVF plus gender selection was a commercial for a surrogacy clinic in the Ukraine. And I scrolled a bit through their website, and then I found this balance guarantee package. So for less than 50,000 euros, I can get, first of all, a surrogate mother, so a woman that carries my baby and gives birth to my baby. Then I can also add an egg donation. So if I do not have eggs on my own, let's say because I lost them in chemotherapy, or let's say I am of an age where my egg quality just isn't good enough for a pregnancy anymore, I can choose another woman who will give me her eggs. Also, we can do a pre-implantation genetic diagnostic full genome screening with high resolution. So that means we look at the whole chromosome set and just make sure that we see everything that is detectable at this stage to ensure that my baby is as healthy as possible. And while we're at it, I might as well also choose the sex of my baby so I can say whether I would like to have a boy or a girl. Also, I get an unlimited number of embryo assessments, so I can have as many embryos as I want, and I can freeze as many as I want to make sure that we will end up with the perfect healthy baby if possible. That also means that I can ask for as many eggs from the donor as I probably want. So I can say, let's say, give me 20 eggs. So when looking at that, this is also the take-home message I would like to give to you. Where do we draw the line? Where would you draw the line? Also, who decides where to draw the line? If I made a poll among the audience of you, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be all on the same page on what art we should allow and what art we should ban. Also, who can decide what is in the best interest of the child? And also, are children that result from, let's say, egg donation or surrogacy or even sperm donation worse off than children that are born from natural conception? Should we become more liberal when in our art regulation, because people that want to have this done just go abroad anyway and have it done there? Or should we go the other way, and should we punish people that go on reproductive tourism? Should we put a fine on them, or should we even take the children that result from reproductive tourism away from the parents? Before I finish, I would quickly like to tell you about my dissertation topic. It's about embryo donation or embryo adoption, which is currently illegal in Switzerland. So when a couple has in vitro fertilization, so they can create more embryos than they transfer at a time. And if they're lucky, they don't need all the embryos because they have a successful pregnancy or 2 successful pregnancies, and then they have the children that they want. Or let's say the couple split and said that they do not want to have children anymore together, but they do have leftover embryos, so embryos that are still cryopreserved. We call them surplus embryos. And as of right now, the couple can only choose to have them immediately destroyed, or they can donate them to science, where they will be mostly used in stem cell research. In my dissertation, I ask, why don't we give the couple a third possibility, to give the embryos up for adoption, so to put them up for adoption at an embryo stage and donate them to another couple who cannot have babies on their own. And why do I think that would be a good idea? Because it would help the embryo live. So it would be in the best interest of the embryo to live instead of getting destroyed. There wouldn't be a risk for designer babies because these are embryos from real couples. So we do not combine a sperm donation and an egg donation and choose the best egg donor and best sperm donor. No, these are real life couples who have embryos. So this might be an alternative or a middle ground when looking at what is all medically possible and what we allow in our restrictive approach in Switzerland. Okay, thank you for your attention. If you'd like to know more about my dissertation topic on embryo donation or adoption, or if you have any other questions, just feel free to contact me via email or ask the questions later in the Q&A. Thank you.
So thank you to both of our speakers for their very interesting talks. I enjoyed listening to them both, and I learned so many new things during the talks. Now, they will join us for a live Q&A session shortly. And I want to encourage you to ask questions again. Head over to slide.do and enter the code nano-ethics. And there you can ask questions to the talks that our speakers will then answer during our live Q&A. So don't be shy and ask whatever comes up to your mind. You can also head to the video description down below if you want to ask some questions later. So I see that both of our speakers are now live. So I want to greet them both. Hi, Valentina, and hi, Ning. Thank you again for your talks. I want to begin to ask you, Ning, something to your topic. And you told us about your journey, about what you saw when you went to Nepal and how the conditions were. And one of our questions was, what was the most surprising thing that you learned during your travels and during your field work in Nepal?
So Nepal was like the first case study that I've done, right? And after Nepal, I went to Malawi also for another case study on cargo drone. And then in this particular case, the most surprising part would be the resilience of the local community members. And which is also why I use the title "We Live on Hope," because as you may have heard, and they literally have nothing there. Actually, a very simple life, and they don't have a lot of expectations towards life, and and they're quite happy with what they have. And despite all the disasters and other challenges they have in life, and they're still so optimistic, so positive, and so hopeful towards life. And so I was really, really amazed by their resilience. And I think it's something that I, as a researcher from the West, let's say, I mean, I'm not a Westerner, but I have been living and working and studying here in the West. I think it's really something that we all can benefit from in life, and also in terms of work, I think.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, at the top, the title of your talk was "We Live on Hope." Now we have a question from an audience member that says, do you think science is fast enough to keep up with, to keep track with all of the needs that a society has? We saw that the earthquake in Nepal happened in 2015, sorry. So it's been 5 years and we're still living on hope. So how do you see that as someone who works in this field?
Yeah, good question. Thank you for the, this person from the audience for asking this question. I think it might be interesting to first distinguish science from technology. I mean, they're interrelated, obviously, but they're also very different. Let me focus on technology, since I work on technology ethics more than science. I think it's not just about drones or about this reproductive technology, as Valentina was presenting. All emerging technologies are evolving so rapidly. And they, like it or not, they're already part of our lives. And then, they do good or do bad or whatever, in their own ways. And so it's really a challenge for regulators to come up with it, and policymakers, and not only them, and just for like ordinary citizens like you and I, and I guess we have a hard time also to cope with it. Let's take the pandemic, for example. I mean, before the pandemic, for example, this is just personal experience. I never really used Twitter because I didn't need to, and I didn't like the concept of it. But now, since I'm all like alone in my little studio, and I needed to have a lot of information, and I needed to know what's going on out there, and so somehow there was a new need that was emerged from this context. And so I started using Twitter. I mean, this is yet another social media platform in my life. And I think we just all really have a hard time to cope with not only the technology progress, but also our own circumstances in life. I don't know if I answered the question, but just some
so let me recap. Technology is fast evolving, but it isn't necessarily evolving to cater to our, let's say, the needs of our society. So that's why sometimes it takes longer to use the technology for humanitarian purposes, for example.
Yeah, that, and also on the other side, you have so technology is also nudging us, right? Like in certain situations, I would be nudged to use it, and in other situations, maybe I won't be I won't be lured into it, let's say. And so there's also this nudging effects. In a way, technology is also driving our needs, or even creating new needs. I guess you can relate that to Valentina's talk as well. And if there wasn't the possibility, or the technology wasn't available, maybe people were not necessarily aware of their needs. And now suddenly this is available. Oh, actually, I can also do it, and I do have the need. Let me, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your insights. Now I have a question for Valentina. So you said that embryo donation is currently prohibited in Switzerland. Now, do you know what are the reasonings behind this, or what stands in the way between an embryo that a couple maybe wants to donate to an infertile embryo, to an infertile couple, and the law that is against it?
Okay, so the main reason is that if we have embryo donation, we also have an included egg donation within it. So there's again the split motherhood. We have the mother who gives her genetics, the egg donor, and then we have the mother who carries the baby and gives birth to the baby. She's the biological mother. And in Switzerland, the law believes that this will harm the child, to know that it's not, that it has two mothers, a biological and a genetic mother. So that's the strongest reason opposed to it.
But let me play devil's advocate here. So, but in the grand scheme of things, if we have like a regular adoption, we have a biological mother that gives up her child for adoption for whatever reasons, and then we have the social mother that then adopts the child, and then we have a social mother and a biological mother. So is the reasoning that a social mother and a biological mother, when they are not the same, that's not the problem, but if you have a genetic and a biological mother, it's different?
Yeah, so that's actually also what I argue, because with embryo adoption, the social mother also gives birth and has the bonding already while the baby's in the belly, so the bond should be even stronger. What is argued is that with the normal adoption, I would say, is that the child lives, exists, and is in need of parents, whereas we say an embryo is not really a human being already, so we might as well destroy it, but we cannot just destroy a living child, so we make the best out of the situation.
Okay. Interesting take on the destroy the living child, if I may remark. So I have another question for you from our audience members. If you could allow one art method that is not allowed in Switzerland, which one would you choose from your standpoint?
Well, of course, I'm an advocate of embryo donation, but if you allow embryo donation, you should also allow for egg donation, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. And the literature and the studies are actually quite strongly in favor of egg donation. So why do we allow for sperm donors, but not for egg donors? Does not really make sense if you look into the subject. So I think that would be the next step, to first allow egg donation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your insights. And now another question to Ning. That's one of my questions. Do you know how much do the people in Nepal know, or also in the other countries that you visited, how much do they know about what happens to their data, or what the implications are of the usage of drones? I mean, does somebody go there and explain them whatever happens, or is it just the drones will come and here is your consent form?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, it might be helpful to first distinguish from the people that I interviewed, meaning people from this community, because they had very firsthand experiences with either witnessing the drone or being part of it, and or their data. The data of the houses has been collected and all that from the other citizens of Nepal, which I didn't have the chance to interview. And so I'll just focus on the ones that I did have interaction with. And so there, the organization that I work with, they did an amazing job there. They did, community sensitization and a lot of information sessions, which even till today, the villagers still remember. And so basically they explained the villagers, like I explained in the presentation, why they're using this and how they're going to use it and all that. And so the question isn't from this side, isn't from the humanitarian worker side, in the sense that whether they did all the work. I mean, apparently they did. Now, my question was more centered around their literacy level. So to what extent they actually, were able to understand. I mean, before going into this whole drone thing, I myself, I consider myself being a relatively educated person, but I didn't know so much about drones, honestly. And so there's the conventional literacy in terms of schooling and education. You also have the technological literacy. And so these people, typically, they don't really they probably don't even use smartphones like we do, so let alone a more advanced robotic technological application, right? And so the question was more regarding to what extent they actually understood everything. Yeah. But from the humanitarian organization side, they did try to explain them in various ways. And I think from this side it was effective, at least in my view.
Okay, so that's actually a good approach. Maybe another question, a way to don't touch too much on the data usage and data rights. Maybe one could use satellite technology instead. Do you know anything about it? Why isn't it used, or is it used, and how it is?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned in the presentation, there are existing techniques. I mean, drones are still relatively new. And before drones arrived, we were managing all these problems. And so satellite has been one of the major ways that we can deploy in managing disasters or landslides. So the thing with satellite is this, and first of all, it's a very weather dependent. So it's at a high altitude. It's not like drones are at the low altitude in the airspace. So when it's very high, if it's cloudy, and then you cannot really see anything because it's a cloud above the terrain. So you cannot really capture image. And then also because it's so high up, and so the resolution is not so high. And even if there isn't cloud. And then the other thing is, the scholars have also been discussing about satellite data, because the satellite images also, the humanitarian organizations do not have the financial capacity to buy a satellite and launch it up there and capture images and in such a rapid, fast way. And so drones, in comparison, are much more accessible and easy to use, and it's just a high resolution. So I think the whole, to me, the best selling point, and it's also the so-called the most evil part of drone, is the same thing, which is very easy to use, very cheap to get, and then and it's so satellite is one way. The other way is you can also install some ground measurements like a prism, or there was some other things. I'm not quite familiar with the terminology, but you can install something on the landslide, but it's super deep, the landslide, and then human safety and security is at risk. And then whereas when you shoot a drone there, and you don't have to have any human to be inside the landslide to capture or to measure to get the data that you needed. So it does have a lot of advantages here. And honestly, mapping or image capturing is already a rather standard use today. Because don't forget, this was 5 years ago. That was probably the first wave of using robotics in the humanitarian missions. But now it's completely a different story. Yeah.
Yeah, so drones seem to be a middle ground between the output that you get and the input, and how much you need human assistance and how much you interfere actually with the populations living there. So it seems like a good option.
Yeah, it's not even middle ground. The advantage of using drones versus satellite, let's say, is huge. It's rather like self-evident. Drone has so much advantage over satellite, and it's almost like you don't have any reason not to use it in a way. Of course, we don't talk about data at this moment, right? Only talking about the technical capacity of the two different ways. But then you have, of course, all these ethical issues in terms of data that you have to take into consideration. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. We have a question for Valentina. Do you know how dangerous is an egg donation for a woman?
Okay, so we have this problem of an overstimulation. So we women, we know that. So every month we develop one fertile egg. And if you do art, then one egg is just not enough. You need to have more eggs. So you get medicine, you inject hormones, that more than one fertilized egg will grow. And if you do that too much, like if you have too many hormones, we have problems of it just being too much for the body, and that can actually be even deadly for the woman, which just lead to severe health issues. However, with increasing medicine advances, we can lower this risk. So if we have a normal egg collection of, let's say, 8 to 12 eggs, then the risk of this overstimulation syndrome is very low. However, if we go to countries where the rights of egg donors are not that protected, then there's, of course, there is the risk, especially in third world countries where people or where women just for money donate their eggs to make an income. We do have the risk of health effects that result from it. Yeah.
Okay, so it seems that the danger that a woman can be put under is also considered in the law, and why egg donation is prohibited in Switzerland, as I understood correctly. Is it also a part of why we don't do that, except apart from only the division between social and biological and genetic mother?
It used to be, but not anymore, because if you want to do in vitro fertilization with your own eggs, you can extract up to 12 eggs from your body. That is allowed. So it used to be that we say that egg donation is much more dangerous than sperm donation, because we all know, we see in our TV how sperm gets collected usually. It's not that difficult for a man, and also quite pleasurable for him too. So it's a very different procedure. But no, not anymore. So the risk of women in egg donation or extracting eggs does not play a role anymore in Western societies, at least.
Okay, so we have another controversial question, somewhat, regarding your topic, Valentina. Should parents not be allowed to improve their children as long as it is doing enhancements, say, if they are musically talented or athletic and not only cosmetic procedures? I mean, someone could argue that education is somewhat of an enhancement, because you try to give the best possibilities to your child, and if you are musically talented, you will, I would not say drive, but you will encourage your children to be more musically active. So how is the ethics behind it? What is your opinion? Isn't it not the same thing or similar thing?
I think we should distinguish between the interests that you have for your own life, or as parents for your child's life, and then the interests that we should respect as a society. So for your own child, of course you want the best. Most women will probably murder for the health of their baby, but we cannot allow for that to happen. So let's say your child is in need of a donor heart. As a mother, maybe you will kill somebody to get their heart for your baby, but we cannot allow that as a society. We need to have some rules that are like the standard that we should respect. And if we allow for too many enhancements to be possible, let's say you have the problem now with Down syndrome. Down syndrome is detectable at a stage where you can still abort the baby. So what if you decide not to abort the baby? What if you decide to have a child with Down syndrome? What if one day the society decides that we should not pay for the healthcare of that child anymore because the mom could have just aborted it? What if you go further and further and further and say, well, why does your child have a heart disease? You could have aborted it, or you could have selected it at an embryo stage, so the health insurance won't cover it anymore. That is, on the one hand, the interest that you have as a parent, to just have the best possible and just help your child all the way through. And what we say as a society, where we still are social and have a social construct to help the weak.
Okay, so we have to distinguish between these two views, you'd say.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Exactly.
So I'd say that we take one question each next before we wrap up. And we have a question for Ning, as it is quite a current topic with the COVID-19 pandemic. Will you include in your research some thoughts about how cargo drones have been claimed to be the new possible good solution for COVID-19, or what is your opinion to that?
Yeah, thank you for this other good question. You know, the cargo drone is really on its rise. I mean, so I do cargo drone, and then the site was in Africa, in Malawi. And because there's so much interest there, and a lot of the players, the conventional humanitarian organizations and regulators and all that, the tech industry, and you also have new actors coming from nowhere, basically. And then, so it's really on its rise. And then I see the COVID pandemic in a way as an accelerator. I mean, in this, it's an interesting context because human interaction cannot take place in this case, and so drone has the reputation to do the what do they call it, the 3D job, which is dirty, dull, and dangerous, and so it fits pretty much all the conditions. However, one thing that's also an interesting kind of tester for during this pandemic is that you can't, I mean, sure, it's very easy it's accessible, it's easy to use, it's cheap, it's everything, but then it doesn't really just solve any problem. I mean, theoretically, you could fly a drone and, we have the temperature detector function of the drone, and you also have like I think in Singapore, in China, they actually have the drone you have the speaker, and then they kind of urge you to go back home and all that. But then you also have a lot of criticisms already coming up, saying that this probably is not really effective. Now, going back to what you were talking about in terms of cargo, so cargo delivery. Having the medical cargo delivery at the forefront is really a very good. You stand on the moral highland, so to speak, because you get buy-ins very easily. You get social acceptance also much more easily, as opposed to delivering a pizza, because most people would say, well, is that really necessary? And what are the risks? And am I compromising my privacy? But then if it's an emergency, even if it's just a firefighting, let's say, and still it's much more justified, right? Just even intuitively we think, yeah, sure, it's emergency. And you also have in medical emergencies where you use drones to deliver for the cardiac arrest, like when you have when time is sensitive, and you have a drone, so that's much easier than using the highway, when it's traffic and all that. And so I mean, so to stick to your question, I think to me, drones are here to stay. I mean, there's no way not to have it. But a more important question would be, how do we live with drones? How do we, in terms of regulations and also social acceptance, public perceptions about drones, and also there's also in terms of regulation, you have the whole airspace management issue that we of course will not go into details, but we have heard that near airports drones are quite problematic. They have caused some troubles. So how do you manage the airspace so that everything is in harmony, and all these flying objects can coexist? And so I guess that's a more urgent question to answer. To me. Yeah.
So as you said, drones are here to stay, and so those are all questions that we will think about in the future, and it's also a question to our audience members to think about in the future. Now we have a last question for Valentina from our audience. So would the third approach, the embryo donation that you talk about in your thesis and that you study, would it not result in less quality embryos being donated, so that you take the good embryos for yourself, the successful embryos, let's put it that way, and then that you give the third one that isn't as good to somebody else? So what is the standpoint behind it?
Okay, so before, like you collect all the egg and the sperm, you have an embryo develop, and then before you implant it into the uterus, you look at it whether it develops healthily, normally, because we do have, even in natural conception, there's so many miscarriages happening because there are chromosomal abnormalities, something that we can't control at all, just because the chromosomes aren't right. So that about a quarter of all pregnancies just fail because of that. So that is something that we look at in every embryo. And if we would allow for embryo donation, that would be the same. So all embryos that we see that do not develop healthily will get discarded or donated to science anyways. It's just, let's say a couple has 6 embryos that look very good and very healthy, and they end up using 3, and out of these 3, they have 2 children in the end. And then they have 3 leftovers that are just look very healthy from a medical perspective. These are the ones that will get donated, and the other ones we can use for research. I also have to say that the parents, of course, can decide if they do not want to donate embryos. So there's no law in the world that forces parents to donate the embryos for adoption. So if they want to have it used in stem cell research or destroy it immediately, they can opt for this, absolutely.
Okay, so that's at least not one of the problems. Now, thank you very much, and thank you to all of our audience members for all of the interesting questions. Valentina, do you have any take-home messages, any closing remarks, or any projects that you want to advertise?
Maybe I would just like to say that it's something that you should keep in mind on when it comes to reproductive tourism, or what we should allow in Switzerland, because we have upcoming not elections, but we can vote on whether to legalize sperm donation for single women and for lesbian couples, because they would otherwise go abroad, just so we know that, okay, the technologies are here, it can be done abroad anyways, and in Switzerland, we might be able to regulate it more specifically. So, for example, that the child will always know who its biological father is.
Okay, so by regulating it, we could also make it a little bit safer, and that's something that we will have to think about as well. Now, thank you very much. And also the same question to you, Ning. Do you have any closing remarks or any projects that you want to advertise?
I guess I would just say that maybe we should all have a more zen attitude towards technology, in the sense that it's neither, a troublemaker nor a silver bullet. And so just be, take it as they come, and be careful with the potential harms or the risks that may at stake. And then, don't really become tech enthusiast and think, technology can do everything for us and in our own good. And I guess that's it.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank both of you for your very interesting talks, and also for all of your insight during our live Q&A session. Now I want to encourage the audience to give our speakers some feedback on their talks. We have uploaded a feedback form also on slide.do. You can enter the code nano-ethics and give our speakers some feedback about what you liked of their talks and what you liked about the nanoTalks in general, and maybe what we or what speakers could improve. So thank you very much. You will find a link in the description down below how to do that. So thank you again for all the interesting talks, and also to all of the audience for listening to us tonight. This will be our last nanoTalks of the semester. We will be back in the fall with fresh ideas and new topics. And this is also the last event that we organize as part of the SIMPACT program of REACH. So thank to everyone who has joined us also during this remote events. And we will see each other again in the fall, and have a nice evening. So goodbye to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, we're taking the stream offline.